Hey everybody, welcome to Madden Science. We're back for part 2 of ecosystems, the living world. We're looking at biogeochemical cycles. So this is again part 2. If you missed part 1, probably want to check out that video first. It kind of comes before this video and gives us a little bit of an overview of the chemistry involved in the environmental science that we're doing. So focusing on this, we've got biogeochemical. So the life, the earth, and the chemistry involved in cycles: water, nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon. Sometimes we're calling water the hydrologic cycle. So we are in this area right here, and we'll focus one followed by another, 1, 2, 3, 4, sections 1.4 through 1.7. If you look at our CED, we're still in on concept 3 in unit 1, right here. So yesterday's video was focusing on section 2.1. Where we're at right now is going to be in 5.3. Just a reminder for the flip lesson style of what we're trying to do with this: notes, drawings, write down your questions, probably follow along with the book. Keep in mind you can pause at certain points, knowing that, well, I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, sometimes even just skim past a picture or two. You'll need to take notes and drawings, and in the comments, add something. I'll give you a few examples of that as we go. So 5.3, biogeochemical cycles. If we look at the APES CED, you can see these listed here, along with some of our goals and objectives. You can see that those are the same throughout. A little more detail on some ideas that we'll do in class. You can then look at topic 1.4 with carbon, objectives and essential knowledge. So that's carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle. Notice that they're pretty similar. So essential element here, the nitrogen cycle is the movement of atoms and molecules containing the element nitrogen between sources and sinks. If you back up, you'll see that the language is virtually the same. So molecules containing the element carbon between sources and sinks. So that's going to be an important piece of what we're doing, is what's a source and what's a sink. So nitrogen cycle, phosphorus, and water or hydrologic. You can see some quick key facts about nitrogen, reminding us the concept that an ecosystem, matter cycles, and it's energy that flows. So right after this section, kind of if we skip back to here, you'll see that right in here for biogeochemical, we're in with matter, and in concept 4, we're dealing with energy. So skip back, we got it shown here. Again, flow versus cycle. Connects to Lion King, Hakuna Matata, cycle of life, or circle of life. I should probably edit that out. Here's one quick view of our different biogeochemical cycles. We'll go basically in this order. It's also important to note that your book has some really cool biogeochemical or nutrient cycles because it shows the amount. So it gives that amount in, say, kilometers cubed or teragrams or petagrams. Not every book has that, so here's some other pictures. Also, your BioZone has another alternative view. So certain views leave one thing out or another, or they highlight certain sources or sinks or maybe the flux. One thing we'll be doing soon will be traveling. So from school, and we're going to go check out and try and experience nutrient cycles, doing some testing of water and soil and biodiversity over at Lake Hall at McClay Garden State Park. Here's a cool picture of water cycle. Again, an image for flow versus cycling nature. We're reminded that all flesh is grass, so we build up and up. In particular with carbon cycle, the connection between photosynthesis and cell respiration. Like we did in class, you're going to want to be able to build these equations. Make sure you understand the formulas, how they work. These are in the unbalanced form. So in general, for biochemical or biogeochemical cycles, again, nutrient cycles, we got important terms here with the reservoir or pool where those elements, those nutrients are stored. Again, for our case, with the four, we've got carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus as elements, and then water as a molecule. Source and sink. So where there's movement out or loss of, it'd be a source, and a sink where there's storage. You probably hear these terms most often with carbon cycle and in relation to climate change, which we've already talked about a bunch this year, particularly with the Amazon fires and the way in which the edge effect is creeping in and degrading, causing a disturbance, and making it harder for the Amazon to sequester carbon or to serve as a sink. So you're actually getting more outflow of carbon and less storage. So these issues clearly tie into environmental science as a whole, tie into ecology, biology. Right now, a big focus on chemistry and atmospheric science, certainly a little bit of ethics that'll come into play, political science. Here's an image showing, how long the element or nutrient is staying in a source or a sink. Obviously, you can have differences in the flux or the transition from one to the other. Again, this is changing pretty regularly, perhaps yearly, seasonally, daily. We'll start first with water. So the hydrologic cycle or the water cycle. I'll put the link down here. A few years ago I gave a talk at my old school on water, interdependence and emergence, so you can check that out below. Here again is from our APES CED, breaking down our objectives. You can see for learning objectives and essential knowledge. Shows most of the things that you already know. Some key stats. Ocean is the main reservoir, holding probably 97.5% of all water on Earth. Again, 3 or so percent is fresh, and 2/3 of that is locked away. Glaciers, ice caps, snowfields. Here's a good view of the cycle in our book. Notice that you have reservoirs in black, and you have flux in red. Note the amounts here, just an insane amount. Again, 97% in the oceans, and everything else can be around 3 or even less than 3. The units in here are in kilometers cubed, which is pretty hard to fathom. We'll do more on that in a minute when we do some APES math. So again, when we do these, we want to pay attention. Reservoirs in black, processes, fluxes in red. What are our units? And then also keep in mind that even as you see these, that's one place. Clearly not everyone or every place looks like this. This is a Tallahassee, for instance. So we want to keep in mind that there's some changes possible for these guys based on season and location. Our units are very important. Here I want to just show you some pictures. These are from Paul Nicklin, wildlife photographer, works for National Geographic, pretty awesome, with narwhals, polar bear, a kittiwake. I think that's a harbor seal. These are separate pictures, again showing the importance and the beauty of water and the water environment. For their stats, we got the planet about 70% or 71% water. Typical male might have around 3.7 liters, 50 to 70% water. For me, I've got 18.9 gallons of water and about 157 pounds of water just in me. Some interesting quotes from old and sacred texts and from authors. Even Henry David Thoreau, who said, "The finest workers in stone are not copper or steel tools, but the gentle touches of air and water working at their leisure with a liberal allowance of time." Or maybe even cooler with Lao Tzu, who said, "Nothing in the world is more flexible and yielding than water, yet when it attacks the firm and the strong, no one can withstand it, because they have no way to change it. So the flexible overcome the adamant, the yielding overcome the forceful." Or even here, by means of water, we give life to everything. The importance of water goes not just for the biosphere, but to animals all the way down to our cells. So a few more beautiful pictures showing the beautiful and wonderful diversity of life. It's also a major crisis ongoing with water around the world. Probably need to update that population. So we're now around 7.3 billion. And more than a billion don't have access to clean water. You can see some of the breakdown there from water.org. Further breakdown shows that distribution by continents. Here you can see, as we mentioned before, that reservoir, the ocean, coming in at over 97%. And then the breakdown even further, nearly all of that's in ice caps, glaciers, and groundwater. And then just a tiny sliver of that is going to be in lakes, soil, and more accessible. Keep in mind just this water vapor in the atmosphere, which is even in itself a tiny percentage of the total water, but also an amazing amount. I think it's 12,700 kilometers cubed. We'll come back to see what that means. Again, just another way of viewing that. So if all of the Earth's water were in a 5-gallon jug, you'd have only 3 tablespoons of fresh water. So water delivers life, but it also can deliver death. Horrifyingly enough, at any given time, maybe half of the world's hospital beds are occupied with patients suffering from waterborne and water-related diseases. Counts for over 3.5 million deaths a year. You can see from diarrhea, again, a death once every 15 seconds. 6,000 children each day, 160 infant school classrooms a day. One of the major killers is cholera. You just think, in terms of our economic and ethical approach on this, it might work down to $2 a day to help fix this. Another ethical and political component is that poor people living in slums often pay significantly more for their fresh water. In terms of water use, just quickly, this will come up more later in the year, but I want to throw it in just for some figures. Water use in the US versus UK versus Ethiopia, pretty stark. We could even do our water footprint that would then relate to earlier when we did our ecological footprint. Here it is for showers. We got US versus the world. Again, the problems within the water hydrologic cycle, not just with how much, but when and where the water is falling. Just a number for you, got 110,000 kilometers cubed fall in a year. That's like 10 Lake Superiors. But as you notice in the news, it's falling unevenly and at the wrong time in many cases. In addition, there's contamination issues and problems. This ties back to our ecosystem services and the importance of that. Right? If you look at this, we've got nutrient recycling down here, which is tying into a number of things, including climate regulation, flood prevention, pests and pathogens, transportation, seafood, energy, you name it. Here's another visual showing those supporting and provisioning and regulating services. Water use on Water Mapper. US is a little bit fat. You can see that most and least water usage shown in here. And then our water footprints look like so. The amount of water that it takes to produce different things. You can pause and zoom in on some of those. Generally from the book, impacts on the water cycle are extensive: damming rivers, runoff from removed vegetation, groundwater being lost. See that with the Ogallala Aquifer in the Middle West in the United States. So back to this. You can highlight different parts. This slide shows transpiration as the part of flux as water exits plants. Remember that from biology. This is shown with precipitation coming in 113,000. Earlier we were looking at atmosphere, so I think that number was correct at 12,700. You can also see For groundwater, we mentioned with aquifers. And additionally, the water table, so how much water is in that aquifer. Now back to our unit, which is kilometer cubed. So that's a kilometer times a kilometer times a kilometer. So you can imagine looking at it, in 3 directions. Or, as we have this box here, each side is 1 kilometer. You could do this with meter sticks to see, but yeah, this amount of water would be 390 times the volume of this pyramid, 2,000 times the cargo of one of these massive tankers. So you could, if you wanted, convert 12,700 kilometers cubed into cubic meters, or perhaps cubic centimeters that you could do later. What you want to realize is that the conversion between kilometers and meters is that there is 1 kilometer and 1,000 meters. So that'll work, taking note that this is cubed, so we'd have to do it 3 times. So here's our conversion. So we could roll out and do it 3 times to get to meters cubed, and where we'd have meters, kilometers, meters, kilometers, meters, kilometers. Where the kilometers cubed would cancel on the bottom, you'll end up with meters on the top. So 1,000 over 1, 1,000 over 1, 1,000 over 1. Or combine those guys and just leave it as one whole thing cubed. Now if you do that, that's going to be 10 to the 1, 2, 3 times 3 times 3. So that's 10 to the 9th combined here. Over here we could scientific notation that and put 1.270 times 10 to the 1, 2, 3, 4, which means that your final answer for up here would be 1.27 times 10 to the 13th meters cubed. So that's a pretty incredible number if you write that all the way out. Moving on to carbon. So again, we can look at our elements over here. So we started with water as a molecule. Now we're into carbon. We'll get into nitrogen. And end with phosphorus. Here's carbon. Carbon and its cycle, most important and most related to talking about climate change these days. Here it is where these units are in fact in petagrams, or 10 to the 15th. So that's 1,000 times more than a teragram. So you're hearing about terabytes these days, which are 1,000 gigabytes. So you're going in there kilo, mega, and all the way up to peta, which is 10 to the 15th. So a lot of flux. Again, this is going to be seasonal, certainly changing. One of the major things that is changing is the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is going up. The ability of certain lands to serve as a reservoir may be decreasing. So again, just take a peek, maybe pause the video, look at some of these numbers. One of the major drivers, again, is that exchange of carbon dioxide, that essentially gets fixed by algae, some bacteria and plants via photosynthesis, and then the production of carbon via cell respiration. So this combustion of sugar is similar to what you'd find via a car or a power plant. So keep that in mind. Again, producers, right? Plants, algae, which would be protists, cyanobacteria, fixing that carbon. A little bit more in terms of this, you got aquatic organisms and that recycling, right? Forming fossil fuels, huge reservoir in sedimentary rock. So if we go back here, you can see 80 million times 10 to the 15 grams of carbon stored there. Ocean being the second largest reservoir, so this will tie in later when we get to ocean acidification, which ties into yesterday's talk when we dealt with water and pH. A few more ideas in here. Today's atmospheric carbon dioxide reservoir is estimated to be the largest in the past 800,000 years. So again, that's the amount of CO2 in the air. So oftentimes in parts per million. You can see that 2.3 to 2.6 billion metric tons of released fossil fuel CO2 is unaccounted for, so a little bit of flux in there. Moving on to nitrogen, another beautiful and interesting element with a complex and intricate cycle. We've got our CED. We already showed you this slide. Give you a little background on nitrogen, which you may recall from chemistry times. Nitrogen being essential, you got it as an essential part of amino acids, right? So you got your essential carbon, carboxyl group, your R group up here, and then your amine group here, right? And recalling that there are 20 different R groups that make up the naturally occurring 20 amino acids. These guys come together via peptide bonds, making up long chains of hundreds, perhaps thousands of amino acids. So although it's important in proteins, obviously DNA, RNA, it makes up a vast majority of the atmosphere, and yet that's not usable. It's almost inert to us. So we have to rely on other organisms that can fix it. So put it into a usable form. Here's our nitrogen cycle. You can see both the aquatic and the terrestrial or water and land aspects of this. The units that you're seeing in here are coming in teragrams, or 10 to the 12th grams. So highly complex. The most important parts in here are going to be, at least for our purposes, denitrification, assimilation, fixation, again by crops and fertilizer, by bacteria, by some plants, by lightning. The chemical transitions here with ammonium to nitrate and nitrites. You can see, again, you can focus on the aspect of nitrogen fixation. This is going to be essential with nitrogen fixing bacteria. Also works here with roots. You got nitrogen fixing bacteria here. Legumes such as soybeans are a good example of that. Good connection that I have with it, going back to the old days, is with aquaponics, where you're growing plants and fish together, where the fish down there urinate and they pee out ammonia, and that gets filtered back over the plants. Now in the process, you got naturally occurring nitrogen fixing bacteria, nitrobacter bacteria and nitrosomonas bacteria that convert it into nitrites and nitrates, and therefore act as fertilizer for the plants. So the plants essentially clean the water, it comes back. So you have a closed system, kind of like what we're trying to do with our ecospheres. Big shout out to my friends at Growing Power and Sweetwater Organics in Milwaukee for helping me out years ago. Quick piece of info that I'm going to put in the comments will be from Tree to Shining Tree, an awesome Radiolab about mycorrhizae and fungal networks. Another Radiolab that's really cool is on the Bad Show, kind of about Fritz Haber, who won a Nobel Prize, maybe had the greatest invention in the history of humanity, his ability to chemically, in a lab, fix nitrogen to make nitrogen fertilizer to increase plant yields. You can read about him here. So around 1900, Haber was a young chemist in Germany, intent on solving the biggest problem facing his country: how to feed a growing population. Started experimenting pretty soon, arguably the most significant scientific breakthrough in human history. We had to pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere. Turns out there was a dark side to Haber's legacy and how he wrestled with how to take the measure of man who both saved and destroyed an enormous number of lives. So you can check that out. Again, going back through, you got consumers, decomposers, denitrifying bacteria. Nitrogen fixation historically was a bottleneck that limited the amount or the flux, the transition of nitrogen within its nutrient cycle. Again, Fritz Haber and the Haber-Bosch process enabled us to artificially pull and fix, put atmospheric N2 into a useful form. This now has led to a number of other issues that we've talked about already, including water quality and runoff. Hey, some more apes math. So here's problem 1. Check this guy out at home. And problem 2. Check this guy out. It gets us to work a little bit on dimensional analysis and conversion factors. So think through it carefully. Moving on to our last guy, phosphorus. Shown here. Its cycle, probably a little bit simplified from nitrogen or carbon, certainly less talked about. Units in this are in teragrams. You can see once again reservoirs in black, fluxes in red. They also have a significant aquatic or marine component. Notice, again, if you just look at the numbers, the vast majority is stored up in sediment and sedimentary rock. We're getting this through the soil, through plants that we eat. So these are some of the nutrients we get from our food. Phosphorus, right? If you look at the backbone of DNA, right, there's a sugar phosphate backbone. So that phosphorus within phosphate is essential as part of the sides or the backbone of DNA. We can see it released off of weathering rocks in the form of phosphate ions. Like nitrogen, phosphorus runoff increases its concentration in surface waters. Wastewater rich in dishwater, clothes detergent is also a contributor. So you might see both of those things for clothes and your dishwasher detergent, say like low phosphates. This section closes out with managing nutrient enrichment and realizing that it requires a whole lot as things are changing and we are impacting the reservoirs and fluxes of these systems. So here's a number of options, including ones in the Chesapeake Bay. Gives us some of the costs, which relates back to clearly economics and ethics, and also rounds us back to ecosystem services, shown here. All right, that wraps it up. Check out our OneDrive for some of the questions on here. You can see at the end there are just 2 questions. Let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget to post your interesting and thoughtful comment on the bottom. See you guys later.